B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, news and comments. It's Friday, January 10th, 2020. Speaker Nancy Pelosi has signaled that she will be sending the articles of impeachment to the U.S. Senate next week, triggering a trial that could occur within a few days after the impeachment articles are sent over. So this is something a lot of people have been waiting for. And I have no quibbles with Pelosi's decision to delay the transmittal of the articles until she felt the time was right. There is no requirement that she immediately, upon passage by the House, send those over to trigger the trial. So in a letter to her Democratic colleagues issued on Friday, she wrote, I have asked Judiciary Committee Chairman Nadler to be prepared to bring to the floor next week a resolution to appoint managers and transmit articles of impeachment to the Senate. I will be consulting with you at our Tuesday House Democratic Caucus meeting on how we proceed further. So my reading of this is that it won't happen until after Tuesday. Tuesday night, there is a Democratic debate in Iowa, and the senators who are running for president probably want to be there. So I would think that the timing will be sometime after that. And Pelosi reminded those in the Senate, in an impeachment trial, every senator takes an oath to do impartial justice according to the Constitution and laws. Every senator now faces a choice, to be loyal to the president or the Constitution. Mitch McConnell, who basically bluffed his way past Pelosi's effort to get the Senate to define the rules for the trial in advance of the receipt of the articles, he won this round. Yesterday, Pelosi asked one more time for McConnell to share the precise rules for a Senate trial. He declined in Merrick Garland political power play style, and the Speaker decided to move ahead today without any concession. There is one minor shift, and that is Susan Collins, the Republican who calls herself a moderate from the state of Maine. She has indicated that she does want witnesses, and she appears to be working with what's a small group of senators to provide the votes to require witnesses to be called in the impending Senate trial. Now, I know some people get a little excited, but Susan Collins, who, by the way, is no relation to your humble host, has been doing this for a long time. She postures as a centrist, and when the chips are down, she votes with the Republicans. And she has voted with Trump in virtually every case. There are just a couple of exceptions. So this is an unpredictable process. And I want to recap, in case you didn't get to listen to Thursday's podcast. I presented a very disturbing report that comes from an Italian journalist. And as I stated yesterday, this is a singular account that has not been corroborated in Western media reports and in the corporate media here in the United States. But the disturbing elements of the report is that the prime minister, he's on his way out in Iraq, whose name is Abdul Mahdi or Mahdi. He has told individuals, and it's been reported in the media, that Trump repeatedly threatened him. Number one, to cough up 50% of Iraq's oil to the United States. Number two, to end an agreement with China to complete infrastructure reconstruction that the U.S. has whiffed on. And that as a result, for example, after he visited China, quote, Trump called me to ask me to reject this agreement. When I refused, he threatened to unleash huge demonstrations against me that would end my premiership. Huge demonstrations against me duly materialized. Trump called again to threaten that if I didn't comply with his demands, then he would have Marine snipers on tall buildings target protesters and security personnel in order to pressure me. I refused again, handed in my resignation. And after this, our Minister of Defense publicly stated that a third party was targeting both protesters and security personnel, just as Trump had threatened he would do. Then I received a new call from Trump threatening to kill both me and the Minister of Defense if we kept on talking about this third party. And as I stated yesterday, this pales in comparison to the shakedown of Zelensky over just an announcement of an investigation into the Bidens. And this builds on Max Blumenthal's reporting, still not leaking into the corporate media except for the purpose of facilitating denials by Trump and Pompeo, that General Soleimani was essentially on a diplomatic mission when he arrived in Baghdad. Prime Minister Mahdi, quote, I was supposed to meet him, Soleimani, later in the morning when he was killed. He came to deliver a message from Iran in response to the message we had delivered to the Iranians from the Saudis. And the other reports, including Blumenthal, indicate that it was Trump who was encouraging this kind of diplomatic mediation. And that's why I have referred to the setup of the assassination of Soleimani as treacherous on Trump's part. I haven't been very pleased with the reporting of Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist James Risen since he moved over to The Intercept. It appears that Pierre Omidyar hired him as a counter to Glenn Greenwald's reporting on Russiagate. But I'm fully behind the column published by James Risen today, headline, Donald Trump murdered Qasem Soleimani. It opens this way. Donald Trump has dragged America into a moral abyss, and yet Congress, the press, and the public are unwilling to admit that we are now standing in blood. The nation is enabling a murderous demagogue, and we're all complicit. The president has murdered a high-ranking official of a foreign government. The assassination last week of the Iranian general Soleimani was a state-sponsored murder. And here, I think that Risen is failing us when he says, no one in Washington in the establishment seems prepared to come out and say the hard truth, Donald Trump is a murderer. Well, there's one exception, and his name's Bernie Sanders. He has flatly called this an assassination. And I'm not up to speed on all of Tulsi Gabbard's comments, but I believe she has used similar characterizations. Risen continues, the U.S. has an assassination ban put in place following disclosures by the Church Committee in the 1970s. And he notes that the Clinton administration started the unraveling of our ban on assassination when, after the embassy bombings in 1999, the White House decided to launch cruise missiles into Afghanistan to try to kill Osama bin Laden. And Risen challenged that, saying, isn't this simply an assassination? And the lawyers working for Bill Clinton prepared, quote, a euphemism-laden opinion to provide legal cover for Clinton and his advisors. And he said that's why in 2001, Congress did pass the authorization for use of military force, but that was abused by Bush and Obama to begin to kill at will. But he makes a distinction here that Bush and Obama used drones and other methods to kill, assassinate, so-called non-state actors. And Risen says that's where Trump has now crossed a clear line. He conducted a drone strike to murder the official who served as Iran's viceroy in Iraq. Soleimani was most definitely not a non-state actor. Good argument from Mr. Risen. And today, I've only seen this at the Washington Post. On that day last week when the U.S. took out Soleimani, American forces also carried out another top-secret mission against a senior Iranian military official in Yemen, whose name is Abdul Reza Shalai, Shahlai, a financier and key commander of the Quds Force. And because we failed, it appears that it has been kept secret. And the Pentagon will only admit that there was an operation on that day in Yemen. Now, we've placed a $15 million bounty on the head of Shalai. I also believe the Ayatollah has placed an $80 million bounty on the head and hair of the Donald. And get this. In 2019, the U.S. conducted a mere 125 airstrikes in Yemen. And we've been led to believe by the lack of media reporting that the U.S. has just been resupplying the Saudis, refueling their jets, and providing, reconnaissance and targeting information. And the Post reporter says the attempted strike on Shalai also marks a departure for the Pentagon's mission in Yemen, which has sought to avoid direct involvement in fighting between the Houthi forces and those backed by the Saudi coalition. Meanwhile, Trump held one of his mob rallies in Toledo, Ohio last night, the first of 2020. And the only report I've seen is from The Guardian, saying that he spent a lengthy part of his speech defending his order to kill Soleimani. And I would describe that as feeding bloodthirsty ideas to his bloodthirsty mobs. And Trump added to the so-called rationale for taking out Soleimani yesterday by saying that he wanted to bomb our embassy and blow it up. Today, we're being told by him and Pompeo that there was more than one embassy. Trump has dropped the number 4. No details, no evidence. We don't need it. And Trump told his mob in Toledo last night that if he had not sent U.S. troops to protect our embassy in Baghdad, that the demonstrators might have broken in and killed Americans. But they left voluntarily 2 days into the demonstration that they staged around New Year's Day. Facts, they don't matter. Not when Trump is uttering his bullshit. Adding arrogance to the insulting behavior we have visited on Iraq just in recent months. The State Department today rebuffed the Iraqi government's request to begin discussions to pull out American troops, basically saying we're going to be there until we decide to leave. And, of course, it's Mike Pompeo, who declined to send a delegation from the U.S. to Iraq to discuss steps for the withdrawal, as requested by the Iraqi Prime Minister. And Pompeo's non-answer: we are happy to continue the conversation with the Iraqis about what the right structure is. That's not what they're talking about. They're talking about booting us out. He said the mission of the U.S. in Iraq is to train Iraqi forces to fight the Islamic State. And, of course, General Soleimani was central in that effort. And then he vaguely said, as times change and we get to a place where we can deliver up on what I believe and the president believes is our right structure with fewer resources dedicated to that mission, we will do so. But even in that non-answer, he doesn't give any indication that we might leave. I think the invitation has been withdrawn, and we ought to take the hint. Pompeo also executed Trump's recent threat that was part of his olive branch to Iran. Yeah, we are invoking more sanctions on Iran and certain individuals there. And it's interesting because it appears that the maximum pressure campaign may have maxed out. The New York Times cites a Peter Harrell at the Center for a New American Security. When it comes to putting materially more economic pressure on Iran, the Trump administration is something of a victim of its own success. And I think we're reaching the end of the road for what, quote, maximum pressure, end quote, can achieve when it comes to Iran's economy. Now, I often criticize the New York Times for its pro-government and pro-corporate stance. But a piece of analysis under the byline of Max Fisher today, I think, is a pretty good analysis. He cites a Middle East expert at the Rand Corporation. The result of Trump withdrawing from the JCPOA and putting on the sanctions, the result has been a clear lose-lose. The nearly 2-year episode is a lesson in the limits of zero-sum theories of conflict, which hold that one adversary's loss is invariably the other's gain. In this case, an accounting of the major gains and losses on each side compiled below suggests that at nearly every turn, escalations by the U.S. and Iran have ultimately left each side worse off. Kevin Gosztola of Shadowproof has served up a lengthy antidote to the lies that have come from Trump and others this week, including many Republican leaders, that, Iran is this great threat, that they're this sponsor of terrorism. Gostola's piece at Medium, which I've linked to in the show file for today's podcast, is headlined, "It's the United States, not Iran, that's created hell in the greater Middle East." And he does a great job of first quoting the false statements from Trump, then citing a Defense Department document that I quoted earlier this week. Iran's military doctrine is primarily defensive. It exists to insulate Iran from the consequence of Tehran's more aggressive policies. And Gosztola writes, let's flip the narrative. For far too long, all the way back to 1953, nations have tolerated the United States' destructive and destabilizing behavior in the Middle East and beyond. The U.S. has backed terrorist groups to further its agenda, and their pursuit of nuclear weapons has threatened the safety and security of the civilized world. And he goes on to recite the history going back to the 60s when Iran signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which, of course, Israel never has. He talks about the Iran-Iraq War of the 1980s and how the U.S. supplied chemical weapons to Iraq. And here's another quote. The notion that Iran is responsible for creating hell in Yemen, Syria, Lebanon, Afghanistan, and Iraq is a barbaric absurdity. Very well stated. He's one of the bright young journalists that I put a lot of stock in these days, as you may be aware. Meanwhile, we don't know a whole lot more about the incident that took out the Ukrainian airliner as it took off from Tehran airport the morning after Iran's toothless response, its missile attacks into Iraq. The embattled leader of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, is once again caught between the United States and somebody else. He put up a post on Facebook early today. The possibility that a missile had downed the Ukraine International Airlines plane cannot be ruled out, but is not currently confirmed. Mike Pompeo added to his misleading statements today, we do believe that it's likely that the plane was shot down by an Iranian missile. We're going to let the investigation play out before we make a final determination. But we have to remain skeptical. This could be a false flag attack, and it could have come from the U.S. or Israel. There's just too much that we don't know. Now, the Iranians continue to deny that a missile was used to take out this airliner, and that kind of compounds the level of confusion that we see as we attempt to figure out what really happened. And Zelensky was not once again informed by American officials when they went public with intelligence findings about the crash and the arrogant behavior of the Trump administration and the way it treats allies and victims, and Ukraine is both in this case, is really deplorable. Meanwhile, a report from The Guardian says that the crash site has already largely been cleaned up by the Iranians, and the lack of integrity in protecting the evidence, that is a serious concern. It's kind of like the way the United States cleared the World Trade Center without allowing real forensic investigation after the events of September 11th, 2001. And my friends over at Who, What, Why, under the byline of Chris Gay, raise questions about the New York Times coverage of the shoot-down or crash of the airliner, and they question the use of a video that was posted late Thursday from what appears to be a handheld camera. And they say, well, how did the photographer know what was about to happen and, have the equipment ready and the ability to shoot? Everybody's got video capture on their phones now. So, that is one possible explanation. But I've linked to their questions and encourage you to check them out. Link is at peterbcollins.com in today's show file. Every day I pause for a second to thank the people who support my work here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your subscriptions. People like Jim Garrison, DGL, Susan Gavet, and Brian Massey. They each kick in $5 or in one case there $20 a month to support what I do. And I'd like you to do it too if you haven't already. Visit peterbcollins.com, click on menu, click on Become a Subscriber. And when you hit the sign-up page, it's easy to choose a level of support that's comfortable for you and your budget. And if you don't like PayPal, and we've got a hell of a story about PayPal coming up here, use my P.O. Box, number 150-660, San Rafael, California, 94915. All right, here come two contradictory reports about investigations into Hillary Clinton's private email server. At Huffington Post, citing a single report in the Washington Post and no further confirmation. They say that the Justice Department investigation into the Uranium One scandal was launched by Jeff Sessions. It appears to be coming up empty. But here's the way they describe it. Though the inquiry has not formally ended and no official notice has been sent to the Justice Department or Congress, the U.S. Attorney John Huber has effectively finished his assignment and found nothing worth pursuing. That is from a report in the Washington Post. And then, importantly, the next sentence, HuffPost has not been able to independently confirm that the inquiry has ended. Now, I believe that the Uranium One story represents sleaze and not necessarily criminal behavior. The HuffPost, without citing much evidence, says conservative media and critics of Hillary Clinton have falsely claimed that the sale was a quid pro quo for donations to the Clinton Foundation. But this article doesn't mention anything about the reported $500,000 speaking fee that Bill Clinton got from Uranium One in the same time frame as Secretary of State Clinton approved the controversial sale of uranium stocks. And here's a victim of Trump's little dance with Iran over the last week or so. A Massachusetts professor at a private college posted on Facebook a sarcastic response to Trump's threat that the U.S. had earmarked 52 sites to hit in Iran, including cultural sites. So Professor Asheen Fanzi on his Facebook page said the Ayatollah should tweet a list of 52 sites of cultural American heritage that he would bomb, like the Mall of America or a Kardashian residence. Well, I think he's well within his free speech rights here. But he was abruptly fired after 15 years on the staff of this college. It's called Babson College. I'm not familiar with it. And he said, I'm disappointed and saddened that Babson has decided to abruptly terminate my 15-year relationship just because people willfully misinterpreted a joke I had made to my friends on Facebook. And here's the story I referenced about PayPal. One of the independent media outlets that I frequently cite here in my news and comment podcasts is the Gray Zone Project, which was started by Max Blumenthal. And his colleague Ben Norton reports today on two incidents recently where readers or viewers of the Gray Zone Project tried to make small donations, $10 and $25, to support the work at the Gray Zone. Only PayPal first blocked the contributions from being booked to the Gray Zone account and then reversed the payment orders that had been made by PayPal users. So a small donor notified the Gray Zone that she'd gotten an email from PayPal demanding that they provide the following information, because in the little note box that she sent along with her donation, she said, thank you for your excellent work and the coverage of the murder of Soleimani and the war with Iran. So PayPal compliance demanded an explanation of the reference to Iran. an explanation of the purpose of the payment, a sales receipt or other documentation pertaining to this transaction, and the full name, address, and current location of the beneficiary of the payment. Now, I don't know Max Blumenthal's address, and I am not privy to his current location. But that's what Gray Zone was demanded of by PayPal. Then on January 6th, PayPal notified the Gray Zone the donation had been reversed. So then there was the second contribution. I was so impressed with your coverage of the U.S. murder of Soleimani, I made a $10 donation. Today, I got the following message from PayPal wanting me to go to their site and explain why I made a reference to Iran. He said, am I now subject to surveillance because I used the word Iran? Why do you continue to use PayPal, which long ago proved itself to be yet another corporate totalitarian? And if my listeners ask that question, I use PayPal because it's compatible with my subscriber management software, and I haven't found another system that is. That's why I also offer my P.O. box when you want it. So over at another scrappy independent media outlet, Alan McLeod, writing today at Mint Press News, notes that a professor did a study of 60,000 tweets that were published after the assassination by the United States of General Soleimani. So a professor named Mark Owen Jones at a university in Qatar studied 60,000 tweets from 10,000 accounts using a hashtag, which is, the hashtag is, here it is, Iranians detest Soleimani. And what he found was that a huge proportion of these accounts, 9,753 accounts, were typical of machine-generated usernames and a common first name followed by a string of numbers. When you go to the account page of those who transmitted these tweets, you find no profiles, no pictures, and not much activity. These appear to be bots. Are they Russian bots? Are they Trump bots? Well, they certainly seem aligned with the Trump position, and there's more in the story if you follow the link in the show file at peterbcollins.com. Also, I want to commend your reading a deep report from Whitney Webb, who is, I believe, the lead reporter at Mint Press News. And she makes the case that a shadowy tech firm with deep ties to Israeli intelligence has been hired to protect Pentagon computers. It's partnering with Lockheed Martin. And this company, which is called Cybereason, is led by ex-members of Israel's military intelligence unit 8200, advised by former top and current officials in both Israeli military intelligence and the CIA, and they have held a series of demonstrations simulating how hackers working for Cybereason would conduct a 2020 election manipulation. And there have been 2 of these demonstrations with high-level officials from Homeland Security and other American agencies. The scenario completely devastated the U.S. law enforcement team, causing chaos, murdering American civilians. Hackers took control of city buses, ramming them into civilians. I mean, this is a pretty extreme simulation. And ultimately, they canceled the election and declared martial law. That's quite a report. And compare that with today's lengthy report in the Friday New York Times, where they begin on page 1 saying that voting security has evolved with the alleged threat of Russian hacking. And, of course, they embrace the full narrative of Russiagate. American defenses have vastly improved in the 4 years since Russian hackers and trolls mounted a broad campaign to sway the 2016 presidential election. And they exaggerate and, don't provide evidence for many of the claims that they make. And essentially, they say millions of Americans are still primed to swallow fake news. And this is so insulting, especially after we heard this week from the Facebook executive named Bosworth is his name. He said, yeah, Trump used Facebook to win the election. And we know he spent $82 million there. Yet people want to blame Russia and Russian bots and the Internet Research Agency in St. Petersburg. And all of that stuff is so insignificant compared to the damage that Americans did to each other. With fake news, fake social media posts, and millions, if not billions, of free coverage for Donald Trump. Well, the good news is that the corporate media blackout of Bernie Sanders is easing. The bad news is that all of the coverage that I see infers weakness on Bernie Sanders' part. So let's start with Friday's New York Times. Yang and Gabbard siphoning key independents in New Hampshire. So I'm glad that Andrew Yang and Tulsi Gabbard are getting some coverage. But this is all framed around a single voter who is trying to decide between Yang and Gabbard, and he supported Bernie Sanders in 2016. But this is the quote. I love a lot of what Bernie says, though I think he's not going to pull some of those voters over who are in the middle, especially those a little bit on the right. I think Andrew Yang and Tulsi can. They're a little more moderate. But, for instance, later in the article, a Monmouth poll is cited. Sanders drew the support of 20% of non-Democrats in New Hampshire, while Gabbard, who has been called a traitor, a likely candidate who will bolt from the Democrats and run third party, she's only showing 8% of vote from non-Democrats. That's independents and Republicans. Andrew Yang is garnering 3%. And this is after, Gabbard voted present on the impeachment vote in the House. And a lot of speculation was spawned that so far has proven totally false. So there is clearly an effort to cover Sanders, but to cover him in a way that invites negative interpretations. Here's another example. The article is right below the one I just cited to you in today's New York Times. Headline, Sanders gets endorsement of Young Climate Group, bolstering left-wing ties. They are determined to tag Bernie as non-mainstream, too far to the left. That's why you got to choose Mayor Pete or old Joe Biden. The opening paragraph, the Sunrise Movement announced on Thursday it's endorsing Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont in another sign that left-wing advocacy groups have increasingly coalesced around his candidacy. They are citing the support in an effort to discredit it. And even in a little puffy, little funny feature story about the comedian Larry David, his cringeworthy show called Curb Your Enthusiasm starts its 10th season a week from Sunday, and I'll be watching. And it turns out that Bernie Sanders and Larry David are distant cousins, according to a DNA test. So the little feature part of the New York Times says, Larry David has a message for his political doppelganger, Bernie Sanders. Drop out already. So they quote the comedian. I thought when he had the heart attack that was going to be it. I wouldn't have to fly in from Los Angeles. This is to play Bernie on Saturday Night Live. But he's indestructible. Nothing stops this man. If he wins, do you know what that's going to do to my life? It'll be great for the country, terrible for me. I do want to issue an important warning to California voters who, like me, are registered not as members of a Democrat or Republican party, but the odd designation is no party preference. And if we want to vote for any Democrat in the presidential primary on March 3rd, and if you want to vote by mail, you have to contact your registrar of voters and formally request a Democratic ballot. And as of a couple of days ago, in Los Angeles County, only 5% of the people who expect to vote by mail have indicated, and who are NPP voters, have requested a Democratic ballot. Sacramento, it's 10%. San Francisco, 11%. Silicon Valley, 10%. My buddies in Humboldt County, 9%. So let me recap this for you. If you are a no-party preference voter and you want to vote by mail, you must request a Democratic ballot in advance. The deadline is coming up. It varies by county as to when they're going to mail out the mail-in ballots. If you vote like me at the polls, you don't have to worry about it. When you show up at your precinct, you simply ask for a Democratic ballot. Tom Steyer has qualified for the debate in Iowa next week after surprisingly showing second place in South Carolina with 15%. And third place tie with Elizabeth Warren in Nevada at 12%. Is the billionaire climate change activist getting traction? Apparently so. Finally, today we say bye-bye to Marianne Williamson, the self-help guru, who appeared in some of the earlier debates and hasn't really been heard from since. And as you know, I feel that she offered an interesting message that flew above politics and talked about a lot of the moral ills that our nation faces. And she did it without trying to promote a specific religion or spirituality. And I didn't think she presented herself very well. I've heard Marianne Williamson speak, and she, in fact, changed my opinion of her into the positive zone, just to be clear about that. But in the debate, she was stiff and humorless, preachy. Nevertheless, I thank her for devoting the past year to her unsuccessful run for President of the United States. Thanks for listening to my daily news and comment podcast. It's free. You're free to share it everywhere. You'll find it on YouTube. I'm Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling.